Cypress Gardens spans across 170 acres. The centerpiece, though, 80 acres of blackwater swamp. It's likely recognizable from scenes in famous movies, including The Patriot, The Notebook, and several other films and documentaries and shows. So people come here to see the swamp, walk the trails, ride the flat-bottom boats, or enjoy the several other attractions the park has to offer. Now the swamp behind me, it ranges from about 3 to 8 feet deep, but the park itself has so much depth and history and dates back several centuries.
The first ship to come to Carolina dropped its anchor off Carolina Colony in 1670, and it had a few guys on there from Barbados. That was where the Deep South culture was reared, and those guys from Barbados brought that culture from the Caribbean to Berkeley County.
These men became known as the Goose Creek Men. They settled along the freshwater banks of Goose Creek and the Cooper River. The men, often called cadre, overwhelmed the native tribes, and through slavery and power, they grew the lands.
1725, a man by the name of Alexander Nesbitt received land here, and he was connected with royalty in Scotland. And they named the plantation Dean Hall after the royal location in Scotland.
Alexander Nesbitt and his wife, Mary Rutherford, had 3 children and built their Dean Hall Manor on high ground overlooking the Cooper River. They also erected a multi-purpose settlement for slave families near their expanding rice fields and embanked the wetlands into water preserves. They built a house called the Nesbitt House. It still stands today, but it's been moved to Monk's Corner. In 1821, William Augustus Carson purchased Dean Hall from John Nesbitt, who was the grandson of the original owner. He and his sons held the plantation for 88 years. During that time, Dean Hall produced more rice than any other time during its long legacy. The Carsons expanded the water preserves and grew impressive crops.
Well, Cypress Gardens, it was at right at the vex, or the center, the cusp of commerce. This was the most active, the most dynamic part of the river, was where we had the T, the so-called T, where the western branch and the eastern branch came together. William Carson was a tenacious, really a hard-working, successful plantation owner, and made a lot of money producing and selling rice. This wetlands that we're sitting in wetlands right now, this was all rice fields with trunk gates. And the water would come in here from the Cooper River. They open up that gate. There was a 6-foot pitch of tide. So at low tide, you could close the gate, and you could leave it closed for weeks if you had enough water. High tide, you could open it up and flood those fields. And another thing, you could open up a gate and that water would come out, and you could save it, say in a 50-acre field, open up the gate and let the water rush through your grist mill, which would clean your rice. To raise money and to make money and to ship that rice down to Charleston and around the world. The last emperor of China, Emperor Pute, the last meal that he had was Carolina rice, Carolina gold rice, because it was really good rice.
Carson's sons, William and James, would eventually try to revive the rice fields in the aftermath of the Civil War, but with the demise of slavery, they had only limited success. A plantation, which once had nearly 90 slaves producing its crops, now had 0.
And after the Civil War, the economy was flat, the technology collapsed, the markets no longer were there, and the northern people that controlled during the Reconstruction, they were not very sympathetic to the so-called Berkeley County royalty.
At the turn of the 20th century, Benjamin Rufus Kittredge bought the plantation. After decades of neglect, a large section of the property became a hunting preserve. Instead of reclaiming the hydro system and moving back to rice fields, Kittredge went a different direction with the property.
And Kittredge stood out from the other owners is that he was in awe for this land and started planting and started draining certain areas and putting in pathways so you could get into it. He probably was the first significant person that envisioned this place as a park.
For his wife's enjoyment, Benjamin Kittredge began creating Cypress Gardens.
It was her that wanted to plant the flowers. He simply did what he was told. Happy wife, happy life, you know.
The gardens themselves were a system of trails largely on top of remnant rice dikes lined with thousands of flowering plants. Because it was a former rice plantation, the land had been manipulated to create impoundments, and over time, the impounded waters mimicked blackwater swamp conditions and led to the recruitment of cypress trees.
And the reason they have those cypress knees is that you have a very loose and soggy sediment that you're planted in. And so you're not going to get a pine tree or an oak tree in there, but cypress trees have those knees, and those knees reach out and stabilize the tree and keep it from blowing over.
In 1932, Benjamin Kittredge opened Cypress Gardens to the public.
This was a tourist attraction. It was hard to get to it though. It was even before you had interstate, you know, and you didn't have good highways. You had to come up here by boat, or you had to know how to get here by road. And we didn't have bridges, like over Durham Creek, you didn't have a bridge, so you pretty well had to get here by boat. He built a house called the Kittredge House. There was 2 houses built here, the Nesbitt House, and then it just got overgrown. The guy that was in charge of the slaves moved in there, and but then it just became dilapidated and became overgrown until they hardly could find it. And then Kittredge built a new house. Both of those houses have been moved. Kittredge House has been moved down to Beaufort County, and the Nesbitt House stands in the city of the town of Moncks Corner.
Benjamin Kittredge died in 1951, and he and his wife are buried on Cypress Gardens next to old rice fields. To protect Cypress Gardens from development, Benjamin Kittredge Jr. sold what at the time looked like a wetland jungle to the city of Charleston for $1.
Well, the city of Charleston acquired it from the Kittredge family, and then Hugo came in 1989, and this place was devastated. And it took about a dozen years before it was ready to meet the public again and be a destination for tourists.
After Hurricane Hugo, the city of Charleston made the necessary repairs and then transferred ownership of the park to Berkeley County in 1996. At the time, the park only had a swamp, gardens, a gift shop, and restrooms. Jim Rozier, who was the county supervisor at the time, had a big vision for the park.
Well, Jim Rozier was an emotional man. He loved this place. He loved it. He loved it.
Jim Rozier added a butterfly house, which is now the largest butterfly house in South Carolina, a swamparium, the popular event space called Dean Hall, named after the plantation that Cypress Gardens once was, and much more. Under Jim Rozier's leadership, Cypress Gardens became recognized on the world stage, shown in movies, used in beautiful weddings, and much more.
It is stunning, stunningly beautiful. If you just want to walk through here, or if you want to get on one of the boats and paddle through here, you would think somebody had to plan it out. But nature doesn't make mistakes.
Unfortunately, in October of 2015, Berkeley County was hit by historic flooding. The park was devastated. Buildings were destroyed. The property was severely damaged. For 3.5 years, the park was closed. But all of that changed with newly elected County Supervisor Johnny Cribb. With a background in parks and recreation and a passion for community parks, Supervisor Cribb and County Council set an ambitious opening date of April 13th, 2019, to not only reopen the park, but make it better than ever. And that's exactly what happened. From a renovated boat dock, improved walkways, a larger parking lot, new playground equipment, and much more. In the first year after reopening Cypress Gardens, attendance more than doubled its previous record high, and visitors continue to pour into the park.
Berkeley County is where Southern culture reared from the cradle and spread throughout the South. This is the birthplace of Southern culture, and nobody knows that. And that story needs to be told, and we need to be proud of it.